This week, the Supreme Court issued several landmark decisions, and they will secure a victory for the Republicans in the 2026 congressional elections, not because the Supreme Court intended it that way, but simply because of the changes. Well, let me tell you, actually, that's not the case. Probably there's hardly anyone living in the United States now who hasn't heard about the battle between California and Texas over redistricting and voting for members of the lower house of Congress. It might seem like some kind of trivial matter, but in reality, it completely changes the map and the direction in which the United States of America is moving. It probably sounds strange, confusing, and unclear, but essentially on one hand it's simple and on the other hand it's monumental. If you divide a state into geographically correct districts, then the district will elect the congressman who gets the majority of votes, and if you don't know which party he will belong to, they'll just elect whoever they elect. But if you draw the district boundaries with a lot of effort, then on one hand the district will start to look like some kind of octopus. And the most important thing is they'll elect the representative from the party that you intended for them to choose. If you, for example, draw it the way I mentioned, like an ink blot with horns sticking out in all directions, then you can use those horns to capture exactly the people who, let's say, vote for your party. Let's take California, for example. The state has 52 districts, meaning 52 members of Congress. Out of those, 40 are Democrats and 12 are Republicans, 23% Republicans and 77% Democrats. But in the state, there are 54% Democrats, not 77%. So how did they get 77% representation? It's very simple. Over the years of Democratic rule in California, they quietly changed the boundaries of the districts, and in the end, they completely redrew and reshaped the electoral districts. During their party's years in power, this even got a special name: gerrymander. In Russian and in English, it's called gerrymandering, that is, to cheat with the geography of electoral districts. Of course, this didn't happen only in California and New York. Democrats in Illinois, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont, Maryland, and Washington state, all the Democratic states in the United States, redistricting happens every 10 years after the census, and the Democrats have a problem. At the moment, residents of their states are moving en masse to states governed by Republicans. Yes, that's what you call voting with their feet, no matter what they say. And when the next census comes around, the Democrats will start losing votes. What did they start doing? They opened the borders for this and started filling their states with illegals. The thing is, the census is conducted not by citizens, but by residents. And so if there are a large number of illegals, the Democrats will basically keep the number of seats or the number of districts in the states. Call it whatever you want, but recently several Republican states have said that they will also start redrawing their districts, and Texas, Florida, Ohio, and Missouri have changed the boundaries of their districts. I suspect that basically the same thing was done as in the Democratic states. I'm sure, so to speak, I'm sure that both parties have been doing this. In Texas, the Republicans, so it turns out, got about 5 additional Republican seats, because they just returned the districts to the state they were in before all those tricks were introduced, which, in my opinion, are related to racism. In Ohio, they'll get 2 seats. In Missouri, 1 seat, possibly 1 or 2 seats in Florida, and 1 seat in North Carolina. So, in total, Republicans could get from 9 to 12 seats just because of this change. The thing is, Democrats relied on a law protecting minorities that was created back when slavery had just been abolished. They had to get black people used to voting to see who they would be more likely to vote for, so to speak, for one of their own and so on. So they started saying, okay, let's do it this way. We don't accept racism in any direction, but in order to do this good thing, let's allow and insert a little bit of racism. Let's add more black people to the white circles so black people can choose their own representatives. And as they say, if you let a donkey sit at the table, what will it put on the table? Its face and hooves. So naturally, in the Dem states, they started doing this everywhere to get as many of their own people in as possible. Well, that's why it turned out that in California, it's 52 by 50 by 12 and not, let's say, 45 by something else. So is there 14% in City N? That's among black people, and if you draw one of the districts so that instead of 14, there are 51% black people, then their representative, usually a Democrat, will get into Congress. If the Supreme Court overturns or limits this law, and that's exactly what's being discussed right now, then in Republican states, the racially oriented districts will immediately start to disappear, and then the Republicans will end up with as many as 15 to 18 additional seats in the United States Congress. This will fully guarantee Trump a Republican Congress in 2026, which will support his initiatives. What's new in the United States Supreme Court?
Very important news, Jake, both political and legal. The Supreme Court. The conservative majority, despite the dissent of the three liberals, ruled that Texas can use the map it drew last summer to potentially create 5 new districts that could become Republican and strengthen the Republican majority in the United States House of Representatives. And they stated that the special panel of the United States District Court, which declared this map invalid, saying it was drawn based on unconstitutional racial criteria, that Texas actually divided people along racial lines. That district court said exactly that, and Texas came here and appealed that decision with the support of the Trump administration. Today, the majority of the Supreme Court refused, stating that this map deserves more deference from the district courts. The district court should have considered the legislative branch's presumption of good faith.
This decision is so important not only because of what it does in Texas, but also because it gives other Republican states the green light to carry out favorable redistricting, backed by Supreme Court precedent. But more importantly, it has huge significance for the Voting Rights Act case that the Supreme Court is currently considering. If it's overturned, and it looks like it will be for good, it will put an end to the artificial 30-seat Democratic advantage in the House of Representatives. Because of racially oriented voting districts, the entire existence of the Democratic Party relies solely on racially discriminatory maps. This video explains that the Texas Supreme Court's decision means they're aware of the Democrats' fraud with the district maps, and why. It also means that they are very likely to overturn the Voting Rights Act.
The district court found that this was indeed an unconstitutional racial gerrymander, that it was drawn not only along political lines, that the Constitution permits, Jake, you can divide people by political views, but you cannot divide people by race. That's exactly what the district court said happened. And let me tell you what Judge Elena Kagan said in her concurring opinion on this matter. On what grounds does the majority substitute its own understanding of direct evidence for that of the district court? In short, there is none. So that's the end for this Texas map. It can now be used for the midterm elections.
So, the lady just explained the Democrats' scheme and why this spells trouble for the Voting Rights Act. We'll break it all down in detail. Partisan gerrymandering is legal. If a red state wants to take away Democratic voters' rights, it can. If a Democratic state wants to take away Republican voters' rights, it can. But you are not allowed to discriminate based on race.
Personally, I believe that under no circumstances should anyone be discriminated against for any reason. But let's listen to the commentators who are, well, happy or very, very happy, celebrating for their party.
Black people vote for Democrats in 90 to 95% of cases. Any disenfranchisement of Democratic voters, even if intentionally biased, can be seen as discrimination against Black people. And the Voting Rights Act states that discrimination is determined by the outcome, not the intent. So even if you don't intend to discriminate based on race, but the result is racial discrimination, it's illegal. This wrongly prevented Republicans from engaging in the same intense partisan gerrymandering that Democrats were allowed to do against Republicans. Because even if it's purely for partisan advantage, if the result is considered disenfranchising Black voters, it's automatically illegal. And is that the same argument they made for why the Texas maps were illegal? But the fact that the Supreme Court allowed these new Texas maps means they're considering intentions more than democracy. If reason where I go, oh, Dimka was there, he won. Wednesday, the same teachers are an element in the calm Drasovimf. Monday, hide the accent element. They secured their victory in the 2026 midterms.
I hope you understand that if you were doing something legal and someone got hurt as a result, it doesn't mean that doing something legal is forbidden, and that's the right way. If you shoot at someone who is shooting at you and your children, and there happens to be a third person nearby who gets hurt, you still have the right to defend yourself. And now another huge piece of news from the Supreme Court, also almost epic-making. The United States is the only, well, it seems the only country in the world where you can come while pregnant. Stay here not very legally, give birth to a child for free, just go to the hospital, and there you get all medical services for free. And this child will not only become a United States citizen, but also, as we say here, a little engine that will bring the whole family to the United States. Statistics show that such children bring anywhere from 1 to 30 family members to the United States. Well, first the mother, then the father, then the other children of these parents, then the parents of the parents, and then the other children of the parents. It's not a quick process, but on average over 15 years, about 4 relatives come. Although, as I already said, there are cases where it's up to 30, so, well, let's say 1 million children born results in 4 million illiterate people who have no professions, who need medical care, guardianship, housing, and benefits. People who have neither knowledge of the language nor understanding of the country's political system. That is, for at least 2 generations, these people are a burden for the United States of America.
The Supreme Court has just announced through Brianna that it will consider a challenge to President Trump's executive order on ending birthright citizenship. You may recall that on January 20th, his first day in office, he used a Sharpie and said, "This is important." And what he did was try to end automatic birthright citizenship, which all Americans have had for more than a century. This refers to the 14th Amendment, which says parents born or naturalized in the United States and under its jurisdiction are United States citizens. This means that anyone born here, Brianna, automatically becomes a United States citizen. And Donald Trump's executive order tried to establish that anyone born to someone who is here illegally or has temporary status, such a child would not automatically receive citizenship. This is probably, of all the actions taken by Trump to date, Brianna, this is the most difficult one because it contradicts the 14th Amendment adopted in '68. And it contradicts the 1928 Supreme Court precedent, which stated that even if you were born to, in that case, it was a citizen of China, even if you were born to someone who was not a United States citizen here, you definitely still have citizenship here in the United States. You still have citizenship here in the United States.
The fact that the Supreme Court is considering this case, instead of just declaring Trump's order illegal based on precedent, is huge. The Democrats believed that birthright citizenship was so clear and obvious that it couldn't be interpreted any other way or overturned. This is the same mistake as with the Roe v. Wade case, and we've seen how that ended. The 14th Amendment, which granted birthright citizenship, was intended for a purpose, but it has been abused by the whole world for far too long.
800,000 children are born each year to non-citizens, but most of them have legal status. About 200,000, maybe a little more each year for 25 years. That's 5 million children born to undocumented immigrants. And even if they helped an average of 2 parents to legalize in the United States, that's already 15 million uneducated people who don't know the language or the culture, citizens who only dream of one thing, to milk the government. They don't really imagine it in their heads, and not because they're bad, not at all, but because the Democrats teach them this. By bribing them, vote for us and we'll give you food, housing, free phones, smartphones, and medical care. Not to mention, we'll let your grandmother in too, but if you don't vote for us, you'll lose everything. Thank you, Trump said. That's enough.
This was the catalyst and driving force behind the mass migration from Central and South America over the past 60 years. In the 1960s, the population of the United States was about 85% white, 10% black, and 5% Asian, Latino, and others. But if we fast forward to today, the population is about 50% white, 13% black, and 25 to 30% Latino. The rest are Asians, Middle Easterners, and Africans. That's why I'm so persistent in trying to free black people from the shackles of the Democratic Party. They think that the Democrats are fighting for their place in society, but that's not true. They're fighting for the place of the whole world in their society. And that's why they convince black people that they're victims and second-class citizens, so that they'll help give away their country, their birthright to the whole world. And before you say, well, Brendan, there's no way they'll get rid of birthright citizenship. Even MSNBC admits that Trump's lawyers have a pretty strong argument.
The Supreme Court made a decision on this back in the early 20th century, I think in 1908. They decided that anyone born here is a United States citizen, no matter their parents' citizenship. So can the Supreme Court overturn this?
I don't think so, but here's the administration's argument. The case you're talking about, Wong Kim Ark, and the administration's interpretation of that case. It's not that it grants citizenship to all children born in the United States, but rather that it grants citizenship to those who have permanent residence, to the children of parents who have already obtained permanent residency in the United States. They said this clearly doesn't apply to the thousands of children born in the United States each year, calling it a real issue. The decision was never intended to grant some sort of universal birthright citizenship, but the decision itself uses the word residence more than 20 times, and so we have all distorted the meaning of this case, not that they have distorted the meaning of the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment.
So this will be the main deciding factor, how the Supreme Court decides whether parents are required to have some sort of lawful permanent residence. There are already exceptions for children of foreign diplomats, because it's clear that they belong to a completely different country. Their residence in the United States does not have a basis of permanence. So this applies to people with temporary protected status. The key word is temporary. Their presence in the United States was never meant to be permanent. Refugees, asylum seekers, tourists, and especially undocumented immigrants. There is no rational argument that when the 14th Amendment was adopted in 1978, they intended for it to cover children. Tens of millions of undocumented immigrants who entered the country and had children here, granting their children United States citizenship. And honestly, I think this issue would have been resolved if not for Joe Biden, who let in 25 million undocumented immigrants. It would have been resolved, since it's clear they're exploiting our immigration system along with birthright citizenship.
My usual saying is that something bad often leads to something good. The millions let in by Biden seem likely to lead to new laws. Thank God the fraud in the 2020 election led to change. To a change in Trump's mindset, and he became ready for a real cleanup. Well, of the filthy stables, as they say, the Augean stables, and also what he calls the swamp.
And even the mainstream media admit the simple fact that the Supreme Court is considering this case, and it worries them.
And what do you think, Jessica? Is that why the court took up this case? Because, as you explained well, we have precedent and the law. Do you think the court wanted to make an affirmative statement that these are the defining elements of this issue?
Or at least 4 members of the court, as you know, and you are also an expert on the court. All it takes to decide to hear a case is 4 votes. So I think it would have been easy to find 4. To say that the president tried to change the interpretation of the Constitution by executive order, we have to be clear that not a single court agreed that he had the right to do that. That order, which was signed, I believe, on his first day as president, never actually went into effect. But yes, to answer your question, I think this is one of those big constitutional issues where the Supreme Court usually has the final say.
Again, if this case were that obvious, the Supreme Court wouldn't even bother to hear it. They would just overturn the president's order as unconstitutional. They'd say there's precedent. There's been precedent for 150 years. There's no point for us to even waste time confirming this decision. Personally, I think I'm pretty good at reading the signs, and I believe it will be a 5-4 decision that overturns birthright citizenship.
And that's a huge deal.
It's a system that, by its very nature, encourages rule-breaking, exploitation, lying, and fraud. It dilutes the meaning of American citizenship to something that anyone can get, as long as they're willing to get here by any means necessary. And it punishes those who wait in line and follow our proper immigration process legally. This decision is so important because it truly has the power to stop America from turning into a third world country. The hearings will take place in the spring, the verdict will be delivered by June, and I will keep you updated on every step.
These are 2 huge cases that are meant to change America by correcting the mistakes and malice of previous decisions. And there's another decision as well, one that also turns America back to the times when this great country was being built.
Ladies and gentlemen, something unprecedented has shaken Washington, and panic is being felt across the country because today we're talking about a political earthquake that has struck at the heart of the federal government. The Supreme Court has officially approved Trump's purge of the bloated federal bureaucracy, and within just a few hours, not weeks or months, thousands of federal employees began packing their things, clearing their desks, and rushing for the exits. Trump has fired everyone. This is not speculation. This is not a rumor. This is happening right now in real time. The reason isn't a scandal, leak, or congressional vote. This is Doge, guys. The Department of Government Efficiency is launching a secret operation months in the making. A coordinated strike is carried out against agency after agency, revealing who was loyal to the Constitution and who was only loyal to their own ideology. AOOS lawyers sue, Justice Department attorneys are reassigned, State Department employees demand bans, and the media follows. They're panicking because they understood what the government apparatus meant. The same machine that resisted presidents for decades, manipulated policy, and avoided responsibility has finally faced inevitable reckoning. Conversation
is about what the President of the United States has the right to do and what he doesn't. And the court continued to support Trump.
For the first time in modern history, the court clearly, decisively, and unequivocally confirmed that President Trump truly has the authority to restructure, reduce, and reclassify significant parts of the federal workforce. No more endless bans, bureaucratic, and union barriers that slowed everything down. This decision unlocked all the tools the administration had been preparing for months: hiring freezes, immediate transfers under Schedule F, and the possibility of mass actions. For what in the capital formula Washington? Only in the Department of Justice, career lawyers who once felt politically untouchable suddenly faced reassignments, performance reviews, and even these audits. At the Environmental Protection Agency, analysts and grant managers, many linked to activist environmental groups, saw their influence fading according to List F. And at the State Department, entire groups of employees began leaving just before the wave of restructuring hit them.
Some people said that no one was being fired, no one was being punished, no one was being purged. What about 50,000 bureaucrats within 10 hours after the court decision was announced? We have a state governed by law, and Trump has finally gained the right to carry out a purge. Yes, our president is not a king. He must obtain authority from the law, and laws are approved by Congress and then checked for constitutionality by the Supreme Court. Do you want to understand the depth of ideological confusion in the minds of our advanced graduates from good universities?
So when Assistant Attorney General Gerriet Dillon released her now infamous memorandum stating that the department would protect all Americans, not just politically privileged groups, the ideological core of the agency was shattered. More than 200 lawyers resigned in protest after that.
When the Justice Department announced that it would protect everyone, not just homosexuals and black people, 200 lawyers resigned in protest because they would have to protect white people too, and God forbid Jews or men from oppression and injustice.
That was one moment, and that moment revealed everything the Trump team needed to know. The bureaucracy was never neutral or apolitical. It was an ideological stronghold, and Dillon's memorandum cracked its foundation. These resignations didn't weaken the administration's plan, they confirmed it. Every agency watching realized that if the Justice Department's strongest ideological opponents gave in so quickly, they would be next. And then there was an explosion at the Environmental Protection Agency. That was when Washington insiders realized this purge wasn't just at the Justice Department, it was spreading. After months of restructuring, several OOS employees were fired for what the administration called insubordination, obstruction, and refusal to carry out new federal priorities. And what did those fired employees do? They sued for First Amendment retaliation, alleging punishment for resisting political interference. Reuters reported on this, and immediately the media portrayed these employees as martyrs. But here's what they're not telling you. These were not whistleblowers defending scientific integrity. These were bureaucrats openly defying the directives of the elected government. The lawsuit isn't just legal drama, it's a war declaration. After all, if Environmental Protection Agency employees can sue for ideological control, then every agency with activists will follow suit. So the Environmental Protection Agency wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Days later, lawyers from the Justice Department, State Duma staff, State Department, and mid-level Ministry of Education officials began secretly coordinating lawsuits and court injunction requests. They are not filing them to save their jobs. They are filing lawsuits to completely stop Trump's reorganization. These lawsuits follow a common pattern. They claim political persecution, assert a loss of independence, and demand court intervention to restore their previous powers. But the Supreme Court's decision undermines each of their arguments. The president has the authority to reorganize the executive branch, and employees lack constitutional protection from transfers or dismissal. These lawsuits are not legal challenges, but rather the final protests of a failing regime. The deep state is suing not to win, but because it knows it is losing.
On this note, the deep state is throwing a tantrum because it knows it is losing. Well, let's wrap it up here. And I just want to say that we still have 20 days left until the end of the year to write off any amount over $200 from your taxes. Donate any amount to our nonprofit, the Science of Freedom Foundation, and receive an official tax deduction. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, subscribe, hit the bell, and let us know your opinion about the material we're discussing. Tell us what interests you. I can't talk about every topic, as they say. But if the topic is related to the United States of America, and its relationship with some country, that is, connections involving the United States, even so, I think I can probably give some kind of answer to most questions. So once again, goodbye, thank you for stopping by, and see you soon.